Well, South Africa may have just narrowly escaped stage 8 currently after most Eskom employees returned to work. But just yesterday, the utilities chief operating officer had been warning that the highest level of load shedding before a complete blackout remained a real possibility. For more on this, we're joined by former Eskom executive and Association of Municipal Electricity Utilities of South Africa, Vally Padayachee. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time tonight. When one looks
at... Good evening, Kathy, and good evening to your viewers as well.
Sure. When one looks at where we are right now with load shedding, yes, we're on stage 6, but when I look at the difference between stage 4 and stage 6 time schedules, there isn't that much of an increase in terms of how much longer people are staying without electricity. But South Africans are seeming to feel it more, and we seem to have been launched into a state of crisis. Why do you think that is?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question. There is a big difference managing the load shedding up to stage 4 and then trying to manage it post stage 4. In other words, if you go to stage 5, 6, 7, and 8. The hours difference is about 2 hours, yes. 2.5 hours, but it means that there are 4-hour slots that the different utilities, meaning the Munich utilities and Eskom, but more the Munich utilities, have to manage that load shedding as per the instructions of national control. In other words, they have to switch off substations, they've got to do it manually, they've got to do it with limited resources. In other words, you need more manpower, resources, to effect a load shedding that's greater than load shedding 4. That is why up to now we try, of course we don't want to have load shedding at all, but we try to keep the load shedding up to stage 4. But if you can't manage it like what we now, in fact, ironically we're in the midst of stage 6, it creates a lot of havoc, in some cases, in smaller municipalities, a crisis situation, for the reasons that I mentioned. Okay, so given that situation, when you come back after 4 hours, your geysers are a lot more colder, right? So when they come back, there's a higher load that you need to cover, and then you have further outages. Your breakers kick in, and you have damages to many substations. I mean, you see there's fires, etc. So in a nutshell, if you can manage your load shedding up to stage 4, which is regulated as per standard, that's fine. But if you go beyond stage 4, I would hate to go to stage 8, because ostensibly, beyond stage 4, Eskom generally takes more control of the load shedding as opposed to the...
Is that why we are seeing so many substations in different areas just going bust, and municipalities coming out to say, well, we are unable to fix a lot of these substations at the rate at which they are actually just not working as a result of load shedding?
I would say factually it's one of the predominant reasons. It's not the only reasons. I can go back to 2008 when I was Slash 3 Power. We had, I won't say significant, but we had quite a few damages from that context. And I would argue that one of the reasons why load shedding stopped in 2008 was because of that extensive damage to equipment countrywide. And if we're not careful, we will go down that same route now. So if we can get back to stage 4 and even lower, we should try by all means.
What is the kind of damage that we run the risk of incurring here to Eskom's infrastructure and subsequently to some of the other customers when we are beyond stage 4?
Well, I mentioned a few. I mean, it's your transformers, your switchgear, your mini substation that you see on the roadside, cables blow off, etc., etc. I mean, all pieces of equipment along that power delivery value chain is at risk.
Let's talk about the fact that Eskom, up until yesterday evening really, had not ruled out the possibility of us reaching stage 8. It's a crisis, and one of our experts last night said this moment requires crisis intervention. Do you get the sense that how we are responding to this as a country signals the state of crisis that we are actually in?
Well, let me be fair. I think the stakeholders, maybe they left it too late, are responding as best as they can. I think even the Eskom executive team, they are trying to do the best with the cards that they've been dealt with, and that's another conversation we can go into, right? But I think the argument that I would put on the table is, did we leave it too late? I think the fact of the matter is, if we talk about Eskom, I'm not ruling out the status of the municipal infrastructure. That's also quite debilitating at the moment for various reasons. But from the Eskom side, Eskom, especially generation, is going down a spiral. I'm not calling it a death spiral at this moment. It's going down a spiral based on facts that if we do not arrest that downward spiral ASAP, then we would get to obviously stage 8, which is not far off away, and we would plunge this country into a further crisis. And that's been talked about. So I'm of the opinion that given certain interventions, which I think the various stakeholders are considering, we can arrest that downward spiral. But if I talk as a professional engineer, technocrat, I've been in this game for 40 years, I'm not sure if we can turn it around as utilities or as Eskom alone. We need third-party interventions. We need the private sector to play a greater role. And importantly, getting technical, we need a grid that can take on the 6,000 megawatts plus or minus of electrons that we need like yesterday. And given that, and maybe I should put this on the table, we need all hands on deck, right? There's a lot of vested interest that's being played out in this landscape at the moment. I think in the best interest of SA Incorporated, all stakeholders, right? And there I'll talk about the AMEU. The AMEU, in terms of its membership, Munich's, metros, we have a number of differences with Eskom over the years, right? And that's been known. But we said in the best interest of the country, as SA Incorporated, our membership will cooperate, maybe I should use the word collaborate, with Eskom to get over this crisis, right?
There are concerns about the ability of the current management executives to arrest the spiral that you're talking about, where generation capacity is involved. I mean, are there low-hanging fruit? Right now, South Africans need solutions to this problem. And unfortunately, the one thing that we don't have is the confidence that this is going to be turned around in the short to medium term. We're always being told the long game, that it's going to be at least 3 years in the making before we get to any solution that can stop or halt this crisis that we're currently in.
I'm glad you asked that question. And a quick response, there are low-hanging fruit. We addressed that with the Eskom's executive team a few weeks ago. A number of us that were at Eskom senior management team at the time when Eskom was performing well. So just a quick low-hanging fruit, right? There has to be, we believe, a two-pronged strategy, a short-term and a long-term. The short-term is not like yesterday. The short-term could be 2 to 3 years, right? And the long-term is more than that. In the short-term, I think Eskom generation cannot fix all power stations. I think it's gone too far, right, in terms of the deterioration. What Eskom needs to do, and I think the management is considering that eventually we will decommission the older stations and get to those 6 stations that I think that will be there post-2035. And then apply all competencies and experiences, new technologies to that. But having said that, Kathy, while decommissioning the old stations, we must just be careful that we are placing too much of emphasis on renewables. The sun doesn't shine 24 hours, the wind doesn't shine, right? We need what we call, in technical terms, dispatchable power. So very quickly, as we decommission the old power stations, we should have what we call a repowering strategy, where we use some of the, let's call it the HV yards, etc., and then we bring in gas. I'm a strong player in favor of nuclear, but nuclear from a modular perspective. So that could be a short-term strategy as we evolve to the long term, get to the 6 power stations, focus on that, and then there has to be a whole host of other issues, changing the culture, the mindset, the thinking of people, and then we need to focus on JET, the Just Energy Transition, and do that in parallel. But having said all of that, we need 6,000 megawatts quickly. And this is where, don't forget the municipalities. The municipalities have always been treated like foster children. People don't realize that the municipalities, like the EIUG members, consume about 42% of the country's energy. So we are a major player in this country, right? So when we say that, any restructuring of Eskom must also take into consideration the restructuring of the sector and Munich. But the Munichs must be given all opportunities of acquiring electrons on the grid. And I'll say this categorically. We don't believe that government is being fair to the municipalities, albeit that government is opening up the sector with all the recent legislative changes, but we believe that government is still putting constraints on municipalities for various reasons. That's another conversation which we can address, but we need 6,000 megawatts now. That grid, national grid, is common to the municipalities and Eskom. And government, and they're the only one that can do it, needs to create a playing field that allows municipalities and Eskom to acquire those electrons, whether from private sector or from that, not like next month, it must be today. So all the debilitating legislative requirements, determination with Section 34, all of that, Rome is burning. We need electrons on the grid. We need all stakeholders to play the role, especially government.
Mr. Padayachee, I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for tonight. As you heard, the solution, part of it at least, may come from municipalities.